Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I don't mind admitting that there's a slight lump in my throat as I acknowledge what a privilege it is to be able to close on the Stage 3 debate on the Cost of Living Tenant Protection Bill. And I know that there will be many people across the country, not necessarily following every word that we speak in this chamber or following politics very closely, but many people who will hugely welcome the important protection that it will provide. It's not the first bill that I've taken through Parliament. I led a members' bill, which, if memory serves correctly, was 1.5 sides of A4, with no amendments at stages 2 or 3, and no votes against from anybody. This, by comparison, feels like going in at the deep end. I would be remiss not to observe that this is also the first government bill led through Parliament by a Green Minister in this Parliament or anywhere else in the UK. And I'm very pleased also to note that it is, of course, the new King's first bill, and that I'm sure will be the start of an extremely productive working relationship. Having been pressing for reform for tenants for over a decade now in this Parliament, this is a bill that's extremely close to my heart and a product of working in genuine constructive partnership with the Cabinet Secretary and colleagues from both our political groups. It's an illustration of how much we can achieve by delivering on that collaborative approach to politics that is at the heart of the Butte House Agreement. We've heard the views of members over the last couple of days, and I hope that everybody during these debates has kept in mind the close to 2 million people who rent their homes in Scotland, the social sector, the private sector and student accommodation. This bill aims to help them through the challenging months ahead, challenges that are not of their making and challenges that are, in many cases, out of control as spiralling energy bills and soaring costs hit all households. There are some, of course, who fundamentally disagree with the action that we're taking, who would take no action, perhaps, to prevent unaffordable rent increases being imposed on those who cannot afford it. And there are others, perhaps, who oppose the need for balance and the safeguards for landlords who are also vulnerable, and the recognition that we've repeatedly restated that not all landlords are in the same financial situation. But in truth, this bill is needed, but is only going to work in the real world if it is balanced. And that's what we've achieved here. It is both radical and real, not demanding the impossible, but delivering what's really needed. One of the clear areas of concern throughout all 3 days of debate has been the importance of the social rented sector, and not just the housing it provides, but its wider social role. This is something that this government shares, a concern that we share. We share that priority, as do members from across the chamber, and we are already working closely and collaboratively with the sector. Bob Doris, in particular, spoke about the importance of tenants' voice and the role that the social landlords have in ensuring that all tenants, have their voices heard. And in the longer-term work we're doing, we seek to bring that approach to the private rented sector too. Presiding Officer, I've gone through some of the statistics that show the need for this. Tenants have, on average, lower household incomes, higher levels of poverty, and are more vulnerable to economic shocks. And that stark reality is why we brought this bill forward. And the Chamber will recall that one of my first announcements upon taking up my ministerial role was to commit to that longer-term work on the new deal for tenants. So while it's right that we've responded to newly arising challenges to deliver emergency legislation, many members throughout these days of debate have also reinforced the arguments that we need to bear in mind as we develop that longer-term groundbreaking work to deliver on the new deal, with a new housing bill in 2023, with new rights and protections, establishing a new regulator for the private rented sector to enforce standards, as well as considering the scope of the existing Scottish housing regulator, and working toward a national system of rent controls for the private sector by the end of 2025. There is a great deal more work to be done to deliver on all of that, and I look forward to working as constructively as possible with members across the chamber to deliver on it. Presiding Officer, I would like to finish in the way that I began on Tuesday, with some thanks, because while it is a privilege to stand here and present the bill and ask members to vote for it, it's never the work of one person, it's the work of a huge team. So I want to thank members from across the Parliament, in particular those who have chosen to work constructively with the Government on some of their amendments to improve the bill. The Parliament officials, of course, who have worked hard, and external stakeholders who have contributed to the discussions. But across government as well, I want to acknowledge the First Minister who made this commitment when announcing it in the programme for government, the rest of the ministerial team, including the Cabinet Secretary, and in particular our officials and advisers. They don't get to stand here and present their work. But over the last few weeks, that work has been amazing, and it's been conducted at an extraordinary pace. I've been proud to work with them, and they can have confidence, as can Parliament, that that work that we've done together will give real, practical protection to people across Scotland, because this government understands that emergency circumstances demand an emergency response, but we will also recommit to move ahead with the longer-term reform which is badly needed. And with that, Presiding Officer, I'm delighted to urge members to support the motion that the cost of living bill be passed.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on Cost of Living Tenant Protection Scotland Bill at Stage 3, and it's now time to move